Welcome to Let's Talk Property, an informal podcast show all about the UK property and mortgage market. I'm Nizam, and joining me is my co-host Lee. Whether you're a seasoned property investor or just starting to think about buying your first home, this podcast is for you. We'll be discussing a range of topics, including the latest market trends, tips for finding the perfect property, and how to secure the best mortgage deal. So join us as we explore the world of property and help you make informed decisions about your next property purchase. In this topic today, in this episode, we are going to talk about, or Lee's going to talk us through an article entitled, have you entitled this, or is that the article title?
No, this is the article title. And
can I share what it is?
Yeah, we should have some like spooky sound effects, but property nightmares that can knock 50k off the value of your home.
That's terrifying.
Yeah.
So Lee, you're going to talk us through that. Where did you find this article?
It's actually from a conveyancing website. It's actually from a conveyancing website. Yeah. So it was kind of off the back of one of the other episodes we did. I think it was episode 6 about talking about the costs of not buying a home, the cost of not using a survey when buying a home. And we didn't touch on the specific problems that you find with properties. So I wanted to cover off some of the problems that you can find as a home buyer and as a homeowner, and how they can impact the value of your property and what these problems are, I suppose. So I guess if you're listening to this and you're a first-time buyer or a home mover, kind of what are the big problems to kind of spot when buying a home, or the defects, just to say, when buying a home.
Brilliant. And I think we've probably both got some real world experience of clients in particular that have had surveys done and then realized quite catastrophic issues on the back of a survey, haven't they?
Yeah, absolutely. There's and as the title says, some of them, and this is just taking the average UK house price, it can knock 50k off the UK average house price. Some of these problems. So it's
massive, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an important one to understand, because unfortunately, you will come across problems in buying property. It's part of the journey.
And I guess if 50 grand's going to get knocked off the purchase or the price of your property or the value of your home, you're probably going to want that to get knocked off before you agree to buy it than once you're in, right?
That's exactly it. If you're buying full market value for it, in good working order, as it were, and you discover some of these problems, you want the price to reflect that. If you want to buy it still, that is, that's if you want to buy it. So it's two reasons, really: understanding what impact it has on the value, and secondly, can you get it for its true cost as well, based on the problems that are in the background. So it's an important one, absolutely.
Excellent. So, we're probably diving into it a bit prematurely. So that's probably my fault. So, do you want to talk us through what the article is actually telling us then?
Yeah. So the article is telling us, it's a little table, and it's covering, I think it's probably the top 10 most common issues that are found when buying a property. And it's showing us what percentage and what value it has, or impact on the value it has when buying a property in the UK and using the average UK house price. Now, this is slightly lower. I think the article probably a couple of months old, so it might not reflect the average house price today, but it's around 250,000. It's basing it on the house price. Okay. And it's effectively saying what problem would effectively devalue your house, and how much it would devalue by using the average UK house price.
Oh, that's really interesting. So it says, so they're all based on a 250 grand house value, and then it will say this thing reduces the value to this value. That's really good. Okay, so it's all kind of like for like comparison then.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, and just to be clear, what these drops are, drops in value are, obviously what the property is worth in terms of buying the property with the problem, but also the cost to remedy it as well. Just to be clear,
Right.
so it also includes the other cost to remedy it. So, in short, if something's dropped by 50k, it could mean that it's dropped in value, but also in that 50k. It could be the cost to remedy it as well. So it would cost you £50,000 in short to have the problem and resolve it, if that makes sense.
Got you. Okay, excellent.
Yeah, it's good article.
What's what are some of the problems that I guess are in the table that can cause the property to drop by 50 grand? Because that's what we got in the title. So is that the most sort of significant drop?
That's the biggest one. That is the biggest one.
Yeah, what's that then?
And it's probably it's subsidence. So subsidence for people listening is or for people looking to buy or listening and not sure what subsidence is. It's when your property has moved. In short, the property itself has moved back or forth or left or right from the ground, isn't it? I believe it's from the ground. So if it's moved to one side, or if it's, I'm trying to paint a picture for people listening, but if it's on a hill, for example, and it's moved to one particular side, it could be that. That's a massive construction problem, really, isn't it? It could, in theory, at some point fall down. The subsidence on the property. That is the biggest problem, and that would knock off 20% of your property value if you're buying at 250, so around £50,000 subsidence. So wow. If that is coming up on a property survey, and you're buying a home, or you're buying a home knowing it's got subsidence, be very, very cautious, because that's probably one of the biggest problems to resolve, and also one of the biggest impact on your house price, subsidence.
Yeah, absolutely.
The second one. Yeah, go on.
Sorry, on that one, I was just going to add. So, from my own experience, I used to work in the home insurance industry for quite a few years when I left school, and they taught us a lot about subsidence. And there is actually, I don't know if you know, there's subsidence, which means it's sinking. Yeah. There's landslip, which is where it moves, like you were saying, on a hill. Yeah. If you're on a cliff, you see those houses that are basically like falling down the hill. Yeah. Apparently that's called landslip, which I think is just another form of house movement. Yeah. And then you've got one called heave, and heave is probably less common, but heave is where the ground swells and the house is moving up. So it's where the ground is like almost like a volcano, but the house is very, very slightly, but the house is like being lifted. But all of those, like you say, can cause structural damage, and guess what makes it really, really difficult to insure that house as well. So another challenge to what you were just saying is you're going to not only have that 50 grand cost, but you're also going to be paying a lot more on the home insurance as well, most likely.
You're right, absolutely right. I think it causes a lot of problems with mortgage potentially as well. If you're looking to buy a house with a mortgage, you might not be able to. It might just be cash buyers, because banks probably not going to consider a house that could be falling down. They won't want to secure their money on a house that's potentially.
They're quite picky like that, aren't
they? So you can see, I can absolutely see why it's probably the biggest problem is the property moving in general. That's quite frightening. It's quite frightening.
It is.
The second one. The second one, I'll just cover off a few more.
Go for it.
Is Japanese knotweed.
Oh, the arch nemesis of every mortgage broker.
The infamous Japanese knotweed. And now this can knock slightly less, but 15%, so 37,000 off your average UK house price. For those, I'm not David Attenborough. I don't know my plants to my I'm not too sure. Oh, Alan Titchmarsh is probably a better one to put. But the Japanese knotweed, I think I've experienced it a few times with people and clients I've helped with. In effect, it's a plant, isn't it? It's a plant that you can get, which is an absolute nightmare to get rid of. And it grows like wildfire. in your garden or near your property, and it is a pain to get rid of. It's an absolute nightmare, and there are specialist services that are needed to get rid of Japanese knotweed. And my understanding, these services can take years to remedy, to solve. So, if you've got Japanese knotweed in your garden, that's a big problem, and it can take time, is my understanding, to solve it.
What's the problem with, what's actually the issue though with the Japanese knotweed, Lee, just for people that are listening?
I think in terms of, because it grows like wildfire, obviously it can take over the garden, and it's hard to keep maintained, I suppose, and keep back. But also it can have an impact, talking of subsidence previously, but it could have an impact on the property itself. So if it's growing, the roots are growing underneath the property, underneath the garden patio. I think I've seen pictures of people's patios being pulled up and risen because Japanese knotweed has grown underneath. So, and obviously once it gets underneath your property, it's even more difficult to get rid of. So again, that can have a problem with the structure and construction of the property itself, and can cause subsidence on top of. I mean, you'd have double whammy there, wouldn't you? Japanese knotweed and subsidence. But it's a pain to get rid of. It grows like wildfire, very difficult to maintain, and it would be very off-putting if you're buying a property and you would find that's Japanese knotweed in the garden. Not only would it reflect in the property value, but also long-term, is that something that you would want to maintain and potentially get specialist help with?
And I think anyone that's tried to dig up bamboo from their garden, or anyone's got bamboo in the garden, will probably have a slight insight into what it's a little bit like. I can only imagine getting Japanese knotweed. And I've seen photos of this stuff growing through houses of floors, like living room floors, coming up from underneath the house, piercing through concrete and growing up in through the living room. And it is like bamboo, isn't it, from the pictures?
Yeah,
it's very hardy.
It looks like something out of Jumanji. I don't know if you've seen the film Jumanji, where the ivy's growing through the house.
That's exactly it. Imagine trying to get a mortgage on the Jumanji house.
So it's another one to look out for, and just to clarify, it can become a bit of a problem when you're obtaining a mortgage as well. So from experience, but there are remedies for it. There are solutions for it, but it does seek specialist help.
Great.
I'll just cover off a couple more very quickly. Power lines and mobile phone towers and wind turbines are the third biggest one. So they would knock around 30,000 off the UK house price. So if you're living next to a power line or a mobile phone tower or wind turbine, again, I guess that's something you wouldn't really know unless it's in front of you, and or you've researched the area or the agents have told you. It's although those things look like they seem to be quite obvious and you'd spot them, we don't know what the parameters of that is. It could be it's a mile away, but actually it still affects the value of your property, for example. So it's always worth asking those questions to an agent. Is there mobile phone towers or wind turbines nearby? That's another one.
And I guess there's a lot more of those going up. There's a lot of 5G towers going up. You start to see the 5G towers everywhere. So they do quite a good job, although they're so big, they do quite a good job of hiding them in plain sight, I think.
Yeah.
Things like pylons and stuff, I guess.
Yeah, pylons, power lines. I guess if it's a wind turbine right next to your house, then obviously that is going to massively impact the value of the property. But it's not always obvious, I suppose. Probably a better way to put it. The last one I'll cover off. The last two: water damage and flooding or flood risk. So obviously this is something that's picked up generally by a solicitor, the kind of flood risk of the property. But you won't always know. I think I bought my first home and it was near a lake, but it was about a mile away. But actually that was a flood risk, because if the banks opened or if it overflowed, we were within the parameters of being flooded, I suppose. Flood risk and water damage is the other one. And lastly is poor upkeep and overgrown gardens is a massive one. That would knock around 10% off the UK house price.
Wow. Really?
So I guess it makes sense in the sense, when you see properties that are up for auction or properties that haven't been updated for a long time, and you tend to find a lot, through probate where someone's passed away and they're selling their property and it's not been kept very well, or the garden's overgrown and it's not been modernized for a while and there's various problems. It kind of makes sense, but you're looking at around 10% of the property value, which is around 20,000-25,000. I guess if you're selling and you're listening to this as well, it could be worthwhile getting in the shed and getting your lawnmower out to get that 10% back. But it just shows it can be up to 10% if you're not keep up with the property. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, there's some really, really good ones there, and I like that it's all based on the same property value, like you were saying earlier. I like that you can see which problems are significantly bigger than others. But yeah, one tip I was going to say with the flood risk, because again, my sort of parents' home was in a flood risk area, and I grew up there. I lived there until I was 28 or something, and actually, it flooded maybe twice, but the house never flooded. But actually, it's deemed to be in a flood risk area because it's near a river, and the land is quite low around here, isn't it, in Peterborough? So one thing I would say is if you know anyone that lives in that area and you're unsure, talk to people and find out when's the last time it flooded. Try and find people that live there a little bit longer. A really good way to do that is maybe like a local Facebook group. So like a local community group, join that group and say, look, I'm looking at moving to the area. Can anyone give me any ideas? It's been highlighted as a flood risk area. What are your experiences? And that will, all right, there's always that risk, and the solicitor, like you said, will pick that up. But the real world kind of history might say, actually, well, it only floods once in 10 years and it's not that bad. So it might give you a better idea.
That's a great tip. Finding out in the area, if there's been any flooding or any part of flood risk before. That's a really good one. I find Facebook groups is a great way to understand a little bit more about the neighbourhood and things, isn't it? It's definitely a good way to understand. It's a really good one. I like those tips.
Love it. Brilliant. I thought I'd just add that whilst you're talking about the flood risk. So I guess moving on to your next bit then. So what tips do you have for first-time buyers, home movers, to avoid these kind of issues when buying, and even homeowners that are looking to sell? How can they kind of try and limit these problems or do something about them if they find out about them?
Yeah, so I guess just to caveat, I'm not an estate agent, but I have seen a lot of properties sold and bought and plenty of experience when it comes to this. But in terms of first-time buyers and home movers, what tips I can give you? And it goes back to episode 6. If you've not listened, is the property survey. Getting a survey on a property, which is a report that's done to check the condition of the property, and it would include these things like subsidence, which is probably the biggest one, Japanese knotweed, and water damage as well on the property. So getting a survey, now just a caveat, depending on the type of survey you get, doesn't cover every single problem you'll find on the house, but it's a good it's a report that will give you good coverage as to kind of what are the serious problems with the property you're looking to buy. So for me, it's essential if you're spending on a particular property that's older than 10 years. If you're spending 250,000, for example, on a property, you want to make sure that it doesn't have particularly any of those top problems there, which is subsidence and everything else. So you want to make sure you're covering all angles before you're jumping in. That would be my first tip.
That's a good one. That's a really good one, and I think that's absolutely key. You said it before, so I won't dive into the different types of surveys and things, but you said it before in that podcast. It's a bit like buying a car without looking it over or taking it for a test drive, and you just wouldn't. And based on the value of what you're paying for a house, the actual cost of a survey it's not insignificant, but it's relative to what you're paying for it. It's a bit of a no-brainer, isn't it?
Yeah, it'd be probably the biggest commitment you'll ever make in your life, your biggest expense. So why would you not protect that, and understand the potential problems before buying in and jumping in? Absolutely. Yeah.
Great tip. Love that one. Any others?
Second one for first-time buyers and home movers when you're looking for properties. Sadly, it doesn't mean all problems aren't advertised. So it's not a case of the agents are doing their best jobs to make sure that every single problem is pointed out. But unfortunately, from time to time, you will see, not all problems are kind of advertised. So I would ask as many questions as you can when you find a property and you're viewing it. Make the most of every viewing. If there's something you see, whether it's damp or there's movement in the property, cracks on walls, just make the most of every viewing. You may only view a property once, and if you really like it, just make the most of what you're seeing. And if there's problems that you see, ask questions or find out from the agent. And because sadly sometimes the agent might assume that you're aware of the problems if it's advertised, but actually if you've not seen them, then it's a bit of a problem. So my second tip would be just to ask as many questions about the property as you can, and ask if there's problems. Be direct. Is there any problems with the property that we should be aware of? Just ask them straight. And hopefully you'll get the answers you need. But yeah, that'd be my second one.
That's a really good one, and I think people are sometimes worried about coming across as not enthusiastic about the house, or they don't want to become across as maybe a problem buyer, or someone that's going to cause issues if you really want the house. But actually, you're absolutely right. You've got to protect yourself, and you can do that by asking those questions. I think that's a great tip.
Yeah. And final, I'll just finish it off. Final one. So people who own a property and are looking to sell, it kind of is more repeating what I've said in regards to, it's not wholeheartedly important. It's not kind of up there, but just making sure your property is in its best presentation. I think a big thing, overgrown gardens and poor upkeep. Sometimes it doesn't cost a lot to kind of get the garden in order, but it can make a big difference in terms of the saleability of the property. If someone's visiting the property with an overgrown garden, it's going to put them off. It's some people off, and that in turn is going to affect the demand for the property, or it could affect what the agent thinks it's worth, because they're trying to sell a property that's got an overgrown garden, or it's got poor upkeep, for example, it's not clean, or so I think making sure, and I think most people would do this anyway, but just it's up there, but it's making sure your property is in its best presentation as possible. And secondly, if you're coming across any of these problems like Japanese knotweed or subsidence, and you're only discovering this from selling your property, because some people do only discover these problems from selling.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Then you need to resolve them as soon as possible, whether it's with the person buying, or you go and take matters in your own hands and get someone to solve the problem for you, because ultimately this will massively impact the cost of your property or the value of your property. So you're going to lose money either way if you don't solve it. So it's really important that you solve these problems as soon as possible, either with reflecting it in the price of the buyer, or going out and getting specialists to solve the problem for you, and doing it as quickly as possible is my best advice.
Love it. Great tip. Great tips. 3 great tips there, Lee.
Cool.
I think that people will definitely take at least 1 or 2 of them away. I imagine everyone will. So
yeah,
that was really, really insightful. I like that. That was enjoyable, and it's nice to see, like I said earlier, the different kind of problems that can come up as a part of a survey, what you can do about them, whether you're selling or buying, and some really, really good tips on making sure that actually you're not going to put yourself in a position where you're potentially going to suffer quite a severe financial loss that could be avoided through having something like a survey done. So I think that's brilliant.
Yeah. No, good. Glad it was a good episode.
Always is. There he is, just on time. So what was I'll let you share your biggest takeaway. What's the kind of biggest takeaway you think people should have from this episode?
I think for me, it's realizing as a whole these things, how much of an impact they can have on the value of your property. I think just the article as a whole, it's quite frightening, really, that you could, very easily lose 50,000 in your property value if the property's moved. It's quite frightening, really. So the doorbell's ringing. So which is great. What's your best takeaway, Nizam?
I'll be quick. I think mine is 10% reduction in your house price from not looking after the garden. I've got a feel now because Lee's answering the door. So I think my biggest takeaway for anyone who is still listening, because Lee's not. There he is. I think the 10% drop in not doing your garden up, or not just not doing your garden up, but neglecting the garden. And it's not always something you can. Yeah, it's not always something that's easy to do, especially if you're you've got a disability, or you're not well enough, or fit enough, or old enough, or young enough maybe to be able to maintain the garden. But actually, even if you just pay someone to do it, or if you know someone that can help you. Just to gut it, get some weeds cleared, chop some trees down, whatever it is, and get that. Because I think if it's a 10% drop, the cost of getting someone in to do that is most likely going to benefit you still by getting it done. Yeah, if you can afford to, anyway.
Yeah, good one.
Excellent. All right. Well, do you want to? Is Teddy going to do the outro?
Yeah. Right. I'll try and do the outro without too much noise. Right, thank you for joining us for an episode of Let's Talk Property. We hope you found the discussion of the UK property market informative and helpful. If you have any questions regarding topics that you'd like us to cover in future episodes, feel free to send us a message. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and follow us on social media for updates on future episodes. Until next time,
we'll see you in the property market.